1/7 of all the land on Earth belongs to a single country. That number sounds like a statistic until you try to actually grasp it. Russia is not just large, it is large in a way that defies ordinary comprehension, a way that means entire ecosystems, entire geological phenomena, entire human dramas can unfold inside its borders and go largely unnoticed by the outside world for decades. And that is precisely why what you are about to hear has stayed hidden for so long. There is a desert sitting in the middle of permafrost. There are craters that open without warning and swallow the tundra whole. There is a road built on the bodies of the people who built it. A family that lived for 40 years in total isolation from civilization. A cave where scientific instruments detect wave frequencies that send people running, not out of superstition, but out of something older and harder to name. These are not legends. Behind every single one of these locations, there are documented events, measured scientific anomalies, declassified Soviet archives, and living witnesses, or what remains of them. The reason these places produce this effect comes down to a combination of factors that rarely exist anywhere else on the planet simultaneously. Extreme remoteness, extreme geological instability, a history of state secrecy that suppressed data for generations, and a scale of natural forces that simply has no parallel. 13 locations, the stone giants of Manpupuner, sand dunes inside the Siberian Taiga, a mummy whose disturbance the Yakuts connect to earthquakes, the Tunguska explosion, 50 megatons of force, no crater, no confirmed cause, an open-pit mine half a kilometer deep that pulls helicopters into its vortex, a crater on Ural that grew from frozen ground in a single night. Together they form one coherent portrait of a country where the magnitude of events stopped fitting inside human frameworks a very long time ago. 13th place is where we start. By the time we reach the first, you will be watching in the dark. For 200 million years, no human hand has touched them, and yet they look like sculptures. 7 stone pillars rise from the Manpupuner plateau in Russia's northern Urals, their narrow bases swelling into massive crowns that seem to defy gravity. The tallest stands 42 meters high, roughly the height of a 14-story building, balanced on a base far too slender for its weight. Physics says they shouldn't be standing. They are. The explanation lies in the rock itself. Sericite quartz schist, an exceptionally hard material that erodes unevenly depending on layer density and orientation. Wind, frost, and meltwater have been dismantling the surrounding mountainside for 200 million years, always working faster on the softer zones, always leaving the hardest cores untouched. What remains are these impossible shapes, stone mushrooms, thin-ankled giants, figures caught mid-motion, ranked 13th among the world's most remarkable natural sites. Reaching Manpupuner requires a commitment most travelers are unwilling to make. The nearest settlement is far. The official trail through the Pechora Ilich Nature Reserve demands 3 to 5 days on foot through dense taiga and mountain paths. Winter temperatures drop below -40. When storms roll across the plateau, the pillars vanish entirely into blowing snow. For centuries, that difficulty was compounded by prohibition. The Mansi people, indigenous to the northern Urals, considered the plateau sacred and untouchable. Their oral tradition holds that the pillars are giants who marched toward Mansi settlements with destruction in mind. A shaman raised his hands and spoke the words that turned them to stone. Climbing to the plateau was strictly forbidden. Those who violated the taboo, legend warned, would be turned to stone themselves. That prohibition kept the site pristine and almost entirely unknown outside the Ural region for generations. In 2008, a nationwide vote named Manpupuner one of the 7 wonders of Russia. The giants, it turned out, had outlasted everything, including oblivion. But before we stand among them, at the edge of the known world, we need to follow a different kind of disappearance. A family that walked into the Siberian wilderness and wasn't found for 40 years. There is a desert in Siberia. Not a dry steppe, not a semi-arid plain, a real desert, with dunes rising up to 80 meters, with pale, fine-grained sand that shifts under your boots, with the scorching stillness of a July afternoon that makes the air above it shimmer, and surrounding it on every side, dense boreal forest. Behind the tree line, the snow-capped peaks of the Kodar Range, glaciated even in August. This is Chara Sands, ranked number 12 on our list, and it may be the single most geologically improbable landscape on Earth. The massif covers roughly 9 square kilometers in the Kolarsky district of Zabaikalsky Krai, nestled inside an intermontane basin carved by the Chara River. By Saharan standards, it is a footnote. By Siberian standards, it should not exist at all. Permafrost underlies the ground. The taiga presses in from every direction, and yet the dunes are there, fully formed, geologically coherent, persisting across centuries. The explanation requires going back thousands of years. As ancient glaciers retreated, they left behind vast deposits of loose lacustrine and glaciofluvial sediment on the basin floor. Wind did the rest, slowly, over millennia, reworking those deposits into the dune structures visible today. The desert is not an intruder, it is a relict, locked in place by a climatic trap that has kept it from dispersing even as the landscape around it transformed. Reaching Chara Sands demands serious commitment. The nearest settlement, the village of Chara, is connected to the rest of Russia only by the Baikal-Amur mainline railway and unpaved roads that become impassable for most of the year. Summer brings waterlogged bogs and impenetrable forest. Winter drops temperatures below -40. Visitor numbers remain negligible. Research expeditions are rare. The place stands almost entirely undisturbed. That combination, ice and sand, Arctic cold and desert heat, absolute remoteness and absolute visual drama, is what makes Chara Sands so difficult to process. Nature built a desert in the middle of a Siberian forest and then quietly forgot to tell anyone. For 42 years, a family lived in the Siberian wilderness without knowing that men had walked on the moon, that atomic bombs existed, or that a world war had reshaped the planet. This was not the plot of a novel, but the reality discovered in 1978, when a geological expedition in the remote western Sian Mountains stumbled upon a fenced garden and a log cabin more than 250 kilometers from the nearest settlement. Ranked number 11 here, the Lykov family became one of the strangest cases of human isolation ever documented. The reason lay in faith and fear. Karp Osipovich Lykov was an old believer, part of a religious community persecuted under Soviet rule. In 1936, to shield his family from that persecution, he led them deep into the taiga and simply vanished from the modern world. When the geologists finally approached the cabin, people emerged dressed in burlap and animal skins, speaking a Russian laced with 17th-century turns of phrase. 4 grown children lived with their father. The youngest, Agafia and Dmitri, had been born in isolation and had never laid eyes on an outsider. Their survival depended on potatoes, onions, hemp, and whatever they could catch. During starvation winters, they chewed bark and boiled leather goods to stay alive. Contact with civilization, ironically, proved deadly. Within months, 2 of the children died, most likely from infections their bodies had no immunity against. Agafia alone chose to remain, and she still lives in that forest today. Yet where the taiga conceals human fates, the ground itself holds riddles of a different kind. In the Irkutsk region, among ancient trees, rises an almost perfectly formed stone cone, known as the Patom crater, a structure whose origins science has still not explained. A perfectly symmetrical cone of crushed limestone sits in the middle of an untouched Siberian forest. And after more than 70 years of scientific inquiry, nobody can agree on what put it there. That is the defining fact about the Patomsky crater, and it is the reason this structure ranks number 10 on our list of geological anomalies that remain genuinely unresolved. Geologist Vadim Kolpakov first documented it in 1949 during a survey of the Irkutsk Taiga. What he found was roughly 40 meters tall and about 160 meters across at the base. Too regular, too geometric to look natural, and yet standing in a wilderness where no human construction had any business being. The cone's summit holds a bowl-shaped depression, and inside that depression rises a smaller secondary mound, creating the nested geometry of a crater within a crater. Subsequent expeditions did not simplify the picture. Compasses behave unpredictably near the structure. Trees in the immediate vicinity grow at rates measurably faster than those in the surrounding forest, which points toward elevated thermal output or radiation at or below ground level. Some teams recorded slightly elevated radiological readings, others did not. The inconsistency in the data is itself part of the problem. In 2005, the leader of one scientific expedition died before the team departed. Almost certainly a coincidence, but one that settled into the site's reputation and stayed there. The Evenki hunters who had lived near this region for generations called the place the Nest of the Fire Eagle and steered clear of it, reporting that people had gone missing in its vicinity. Proposed explanations range across volcanic activity, subsurface gas discharge, kimberlite pipe formation, and meteorite impact. None has achieved scientific consensus. Adding pressure to the question is geography. The Patomsky crater sits approximately 200 kilometers from the Tunguska event site of 1908. No causal link has been established. The proximity, however, ensures that the speculation does not stop. No crater was ever found. That single fact defines the Tunguska event of 1908 and separates it from every other cosmic impact in recorded history. Something struck the Earth with the force of 10 to 50 megatons. Conservative estimates put it equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima-scale detonations, and left behind no hole in the ground, no identifiable meteorite fragment, no smoking gun. Ranked 9th among the most thoroughly investigated, unexplained phenomena on Earth, Tunguska is not a mystery for lack of study. It is a mystery that study keeps deepening. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, witnesses across several hundred kilometers of central Siberia reported a second sun tearing across the sky above the Podkamenia-Tunguska river basin. The shockwave knocked people off their feet, shattered windows in distant settlements, and flattened the tent structures of Evenki herders. Seismographs across Europe recorded the impact. Barographs worldwide detected an atmospheric pressure wave that circled the globe twice. The scale was unambiguous. The cause was not. When geologist Leonid Kulik finally reached the epicenter in 1927, 19 years after the event, he expected a crater. What he found instead was approximately 2,000 square kilometers of forest blown outward in a radial pattern, every tree pointing away from a central point. At that center, the trees still stood upright, stripped of all branches, charred down to bare trunks. This is what an airburst looks like. A bolide, asteroid or comet, that disintegrates in the atmosphere before impact releases its energy downward and outward without punching through the surface. No crater forms, no solid fragment survives. The object simply ceases to exist at altitude, and the forest below records the event like a bruise. Except Tunguska's bruise covers more ground than the City of London. Decades of expeditions recovered no conclusive extraterrestrial material. Hypotheses ranged from an icy comet nucleus that fully vaporized, to antimatter annihilation, to natural gas eruption, to scenarios that moved beyond conventional science altogether. None achieved consensus. Tunguska remains open, a reminder that the planet's vulnerability to forces from above does not require those forces to leave evidence behind. A frozen corpse proved more controversial than almost any living person in the history of Russian archaeology. That is the paradox at the heart of the Ukok Princess, a woman dead for 2.5 millennia who managed to divide scientists, governments, indigenous communities, and seismologists, and whose story is still unresolved today. The reason the controversy was even possible comes down to ice. The Ukok Plateau, a high-altitude steppe in the southern Altai at 2,300 meters above sea level, sits near the borders of Mongolia and Kazakhstan in a zone of continuous permafrost. That permafrost acts as a natural deep freeze, preserving organic material that would have decayed beyond recognition anywhere else. When archaeologist Natalia Polosmak opened a Pazyryk culture burial mound here in 1993, she found 6 bridled horses, a large log coffin, and inside it, the remarkably intact body of a woman approximately 25 years old at the time of her death. The skin still held its tattoos, intricate depictions of deer and mythological creatures rendered with a sophistication that startled researchers. The international press reached for superlatives. The discovery was called a sensation of world archaeology, and the woman was given a name she never had in life, the Ukok Princess. The Altai people had a different name, Kadykchan, the White Lady. To them, she was not a specimen, but a guardian spirit whose presence beneath the plateau maintained a balance between worlds. Removing her, they warned, would have consequences. The mummy was transported to Novosibirsk for study. Then, in 2003, the Chuya earthquake struck the Altai region, one of the most destructive in its recorded history. Correlation is not causation, but the timing gave the indigenous argument a weight that was difficult to dismiss purely on scientific grounds. Shamans and community leaders demanded repatriation. The ensuing dispute ran for years, pitting institutional science against indigenous cosmology in a confrontation where neither side possessed the tools to disprove the other. Eventually, the Altai Republic succeeded. The mummy now rests in a climate-controlled case in the National Museum in Gorno-Altaysk. Whether she is home or merely housed depends entirely on which system of knowledge you trust. This is number 8 on our list. Number 7 on our list. A city of 12,000 people vanished because of a single explosion. Not a war, not a flood, not a slow economic decline. One methane blast in a coal mine in 1996 and Kadykchan in Russia's Magadan Oblast ceased to exist as a living place. That is the brutal arithmetic of single-industry towns built at the edge of the world. Kadykchan sits in a valley between the hills of Magadan Oblast, roughly 100 kilometers from Susuman. The Soviet state built it in the 1940s using gulag prison labor, because the coal seams beneath these frozen hills were needed to keep the entire Kolyma region from going dark and cold. Over decades, voluntary workers replaced the prisoners, families put down roots, schools and a drama theatre and sports facilities appeared, and the settlement started to feel like a real town rather than an industrial outpost. Then, 1996 arrived. The methane explosion killed workers. Authorities declared the mine unviable and the city unworthy of reconstruction. The evacuation was fast, and people took what they could carry. What they left behind became one of the most complete time capsules of late Soviet everyday life anywhere on Earth. Magadan's extreme cold preserved the interiors with a precision no museum curator could replicate. Explorers who documented the site in the 2000s and 2010s found kitchen shelves still holding dishes, walls still hung with calendars frozen at 1996, children's toys on the floor, books with their bookmarks still in place. The personal scale of the abandonment is what makes Kadykchan different from a ruin. This is not decay, it is suspension. Everything is exactly where it was left, just slowly collapsing around it. The town was built by forced labor, sustained by a single shaft, and erased by a single accident. Its entire existence traces the shape of a Soviet Arctic project, instrumental, remote, and completely dependent on one resource. When that resource stopped, so did the city. Our next stop is not far by the standards of the Russian north, the Batagay crater in Yakutia, where the ground is also failing, but on its own unstoppable schedule. A Soviet bulldozer started one of the most unstoppable geological processes on Earth. That is not a dramatization. It is what happened in the Verkhoyansk district of Yakutia in the 1960s, when loggers cleared a stretch of forest to build a road, and the ground underneath began to collapse in a way that has not stopped since. What they unknowingly triggered is now known as the Batagay Megaslump, number 6 on our list. A crater more than a kilometre long and over 100 metres deep that expands by up to 30 metres every single year. The reason it began is straightforward. The trees that were cut down had spent thousands of years acting as a thermal shield for the frozen soil beneath them. Once they were gone, sunlight hit the ground directly. The permafrost, ground that had been frozen solid since the last ice age, locking in organic matter, ice and gases, started to thaw. Slowly at first, then faster. The mechanism that makes Batagay genuinely alarming is not its current size, but its self-reinforcing logic. As permafrost thaws, it releases methane and carbon dioxide trapped for tens of thousands of years. Those greenhouse gases warm the atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere thaws more permafrost. There is no internal break. The process feeds itself, and the crater grows accordingly, swallowing rows of taiga trees each summer as they tilt and topple into the void. Indigenous Evenki people call it the gateway to the underworld, not as poetry, but as the closest available language for something that defies ordinary description. The walls of the megaslump, however, offer something extraordinary alongside the destruction. A stratigraphic record spanning from a few thousand to more than 200,000 years. Researchers have recovered the frozen remains of ancient horses, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses, animals preserved in near-perfect condition by the cold. Batagay is simultaneously a wound in the landscape and an unintentional archive of deep time, readable layer by layer from its crumbling edges. A lake in Siberia stays partially unfrozen in January at -50 degrees Celsius. That is not a poetic exaggeration, it is a documented physical fact with no fully accepted scientific explanation. This is Lake Lubinka, ranked number 5 on our list of certified anomalies. Lubinka sits in the Oymyakon district of Yakutia, roughly 60 kilometers from the small settlement of Tomtor. The region holds the title of Pole of Cold, where temperatures have been recorded below -70 degrees Celsius. The lake itself rests above 1,000 meters in elevation, stretches about 14 kilometers in length, reaches up to 4 kilometers across, and averages 52 meters in depth. At several points on the lake floor, sonar surveys have detected depressions that apparently exceed 70 meters. Anomalies that current geological models have not cleanly accounted for. The open water patches called polynias sit in the central section of the lake and persist through the worst of the Yakutian winter. Researchers have investigated hydrothermal sources as the cause. The heat flux measurements collected on site do not fully account for what the surface shows. The water simply refuses to freeze, and the instruments confirm it without explaining it. The paper trail starts in the 1950s. Soviet geologist Viktor Tverdoklebov wrote in his field journal that he observed a large, dark object moving through the water, with visible sections spanning approximately 10 meters apart. That entry was not a press release or a legend passed down orally. It was a professional's handwritten record, logged under the same scientific standards he applied to everything else in the field. The indigenous Eveni people had kept their own record far longer, calling the lake's inhabitant simply the devil, and avoiding the shoreline across generations. In 2005 and again in 2013, separate expeditions using echo-sounding equipment detected moving objects in the water column that did not match any fish species documented in the region. Those readings were logged, reviewed, and left standing. No institution disproved them. No institution formally confirmed them either. Lybinkyr is not a rural myth dressed up for tourists. It is a location where instrumented measurements, a written professional account, and an unresolved physical phenomenon exist together in one of the most inaccessible places on the planet. Reaching it in winter is close to impossible. What comes next on our list sits where the ground does not just freeze, but actually tears itself open. Next stop, the Batagay crater. Every day, trucks and cars travel a road built on top of the people who died making it. Not as a figure of speech. The bodies of Gulag prisoners who perished during construction of the Kolyma highway were laid directly into the embankment and under the road surface, because permafrost made proper burial nearly impossible, because the schedules left no time for it, and because the Soviet labor camp administration made no provision for the dead beyond removing them from the workforce ledger. Number 4 on our list is a functioning federal highway. Russia designates it R504. It runs 2,032 kilometers from Magadan to Yakutsk, cutting through some of the most isolated and punishing terrain on Earth. Built between 1932 and 1953, using the forced labor of Gulag inmates, it earned an unofficial name that has outlasted every official designation: the Road of Bones. The prisoners sent here had typically been convicted of offences that bore little relationship to any recognisable crime. An overheard remark, a denunciation from a neighbour, a production quota reported incorrectly. What awaited them was temperatures reaching -60°C, exhausting physical labour, and rations calibrated not to sustain human life at that level of exertion, but to extract maximum output before the body failed. Survival was a statistical outlier, not an expectation. How many died remains genuinely unknown. Scholars cite figures ranging from tens of thousands to substantially higher counts. Record-keeping was inconsistent by design and by chaos. Portions of the relevant archives remain classified. Others were destroyed or lost. Periodically, the permafrost, which preserves as readily as it kills, pushes artifacts back toward the surface: tools, clothing, bones. The highway itself looks deceptively normal in its developed stretches: asphalt, road signs, occasional settlements. But large sections remain unpaved, dissolving into mud each spring thaw and hardening into rutted ice each winter. Along the roadsides, the remnants of camp infrastructure are still visible: barracks foundations, watchtower bases, collapsed fencing. The landscape has not entirely absorbed what happened here. What makes Kolyma Highway exceptional among sites of historical atrocity is precisely its continued functionality. It is not a ruin preserved as a warning. It is not a monument inviting reflection. It is infrastructure in active daily use, and that fact alone changes the nature of every question one might ask about memory, about accountability, and about what it means to drive across the dead. The ground in Yamal doesn't just thaw, it explodes. That single fact upends everything we thought we understood about the slow, silent nature of Arctic change. In 2014, a helicopter crew spotted a perfectly circular hole in the Siberian tundra, roughly 30 meters across, with no impact rim, no debris mound, no sign of anything striking from above. The soil had been blasted outward in all directions, scattered across dozens of meters, as though something had detonated from beneath the surface with extraordinary force. Scientists had no immediate explanation. The Yamal Peninsula is one of the most remote places on Earth, a vast frozen plain where permafrost reaches hundreds of meters deep and has held the ground locked in place for thousands of years. That stability, it turns out, was concealing an enormous amount of pressure. As Arctic temperatures rise, at 2 to 3 times the global average rate, the permafrost begins to thaw from within. Gas hydrates locked in the frozen ground break down and release methane. The gas has nowhere to go. It accumulates in underground pockets for years, sometimes decades, until the pressure exceeds what the surface can contain. Then it ruptures. The explosion takes seconds. The crater it leaves behind can be 60 meters wide. Since that first discovery, more than 90 such formations have been identified across Ural and neighboring regions. The craters are not static. Their walls are unstable and continue to collapse inward. Methane concentrations inside the cavities are high enough to ignite, making close approach genuinely dangerous. Nenet's reindeer herders, who live across these lands, reported hearing dull underground thuds in the days before new craters appeared, a warning with no reliable way to act on it. For climate scientists, the craters are not a geological curiosity. They are a feedback mechanism made visible. Each methane release warms the atmosphere, which thaws more permafrost, which releases more methane. The cycle accelerates itself, and the Ural craters are its physical record, holes punched through the landscape by a process that is still gaining momentum. Number 3 on our list is where the planet's interior and its changing climate have converged into something that looks, from above, like a wound that keeps opening. If Ural shows what climate does to the surface of the Earth, what comes next on this list is what humans did to it deliberately, drilling so deep that the hole began to behave in ways no one had planned for. Number 2 on our list sits in the middle of western Yakutia, and the first thing you notice about it is not what's there, it's what isn't. A hole. Perfectly round, almost absurdly so, gouged into the permafrost like something pressed a thumb into the earth and simply kept pushing. 525 meters deep, 1,200 meters across. The Mir diamond mine. Soviet geologists found the kimberlite pipes here in the mid-1950s, combing the Vilyui River basin for exactly this kind of deposit. What they uncovered turned out to be the largest diamond source in the history of the USSR. A city grew up around the dig, Mirny, built from scratch on frozen ground, sustained entirely by whatever the earth gave up. And the earth gave up a great deal. For decades, the mine consumed itself from the inside out, bucket by bucket, blast by blast, until open-pit operations finally stopped in 2001. By then, the pit had become something else entirely. The roads spiraling down its walls, 7 levels of switchbacks that ore trucks once climbed for over an hour to reach the surface, look from above like the grooves of a massive screw. Engineers built the mine. The mine, in some sense, built its own geography. That geography has consequences. The dark rock at the bottom absorbs heat. Warm air rises through the center of the pit in a steady, powerful column. The crater walls block the wind. What results is a self-contained microclimate and a serious aviation hazard. Russian aviation authorities formally prohibited helicopter flights over the pit after documented incidents suggested aircraft could be pulled downward by the swirling air currents generated at the rim. The hole breathes, and it breathes with enough force to be dangerous. Today, residential blocks of Mirny stand at the crater's edge. The city and the void face each other across a distance that keeps shrinking as the ground shifts. Underground operations began in 2009, pushing deeper still. In 2017, the lower mine flooded. 8 miners died. The surface has gone quiet. The depth has not. Yakutia holds other wounds in its ground, but where Mir was cut by human hands on a deliberate schedule, the next place on this list was made by nothing and no one, and it is still growing. The fear you feel inside Kashkulakskaya cave may not be yours. That is not a metaphor. In the 1980s, researchers from the Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine in Novosibirsk recorded regular pulses of infrasound between 6 and 8 Hz inside the cave, along with electromagnetic field impulses of similar frequency. That range maps almost exactly onto the alpha and theta rhythms of the human brain. Expose a person to those frequencies long enough, and the nervous system starts producing panic, phantom presences, and hallucinations without any external trigger. Several expedition members fled the cave in full panic. Others reported sensations of being watched. The source is most likely geomechanical stress in the surrounding rock, though scientists have not closed that debate. What makes Kadykchan unusual is that this explanation was available for 2,000 years before anyone wrote it down in a laboratory report. Circassian shamans designated this cave a place of power for roughly 2 millennia, using it for rituals until the Soviet period ended the practice. The cave sits in the spurs of the Kuznetsky Alatau range in the Republic of Circassia, about 200 kilometers from Abakhan. Its tunnels and grottos extend several hundred meters into the massif. Some chambers rise as high as a multi-story building. The walls are layered in soot from thousands of years of fires, and the niches still hold remnants of wooden idols and fragments of sacrificial animal bones. Local people continue treating the site with inherited caution, guided by a shamanic tradition that identified this cave as a direct entrance to the lower world. There are no official tourist routes inside. Kadykchan ranks first in this series. Physics can account for the fear, but it cannot account for the fact that people knew to be afraid here long before the instruments arrived. Up next, a quarry in Yakutia, half a kilometer deep, that generates its own weather system and pulls helicopters out of the sky. A cave exists in Russia where instruments consistently record frequencies that align with the range of human fear. Whether you believe that means anything or not, the readings are real, the cave is real, and nobody has fully explained it. That is the kind of place Russia produces. Not once, not twice, but 13 times over in this list alone. 13 locations that refuse to behave the way geography is supposed to behave. Russia covers 1/6 of the Earth's land surface, and that scale alone would suggest variety. But what actually connects a family that spent 40 years completely cut off from civilization with a crater that erupted from frozen ground without warning? What links stone pillars rising from the Ural plateau to sand dunes sitting inside the Siberian Taiga, surrounded by forest with no desert in sight? The answer is that Russia operates outside the standard categories, and it does so consistently across climate zones, across centuries, across disciplines. In 1908, an explosion above Tunguska flattened 80 million trees. It left no crater. For over 100 years, physicists, geologists, and astronomers have debated what exactly entered the atmosphere that morning. The leading hypothesis involves an asteroid or comet that disintegrated before impact. The debate continues. A Mammoth-era mummy preserved for 2,500 years in permafrost was recovered intact enough to yield biological information no written record could have carried. The frozen ground remembered. That same permafrost is now releasing methane as temperatures shift, and craters are detonating upward from the tundra with no advance notice. The science is documented. The next eruption site is not. A family named Lykov survived 4 decades in the deep taiga because they had no other option. When found, they had built their own tools, grown their own food, and outlasted conditions that should have killed them within years. Human endurance is also a geological force, apparently. If this list surprised you, leave a comment with the place that hit hardest. Subscribe, there are more territories the textbooks skip.